Hi, Jen. Can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So I'm right now today I'm in British Columbia, in Victoria, BC, where I work with Rugby Canada. I'm the lead strength and conditioning coach with our women's sevens program. I'm actually born and raised in Vancouver, so not too far from here. Um, but my journey has taken me to a few other places. I started in track and field and I was a hammer thrower. So I went down and competed at Cal Berkeley on a track scholarship, and then spent some time coaching down there after I graduated. So I was competing still on the Canadian national team while coaching NCAA Division One. So um, my 20s were a busy time and got to a point where I was burning the candle at both ends and just needed to focus a bit on my own athletic career. So I moved home to Canada in 2007 when I was 27. And at that time, that's when Dr. Bondarchuk was hired in Kamloops to coach the throw center. So I moved back to Canada and trained and lived in Kamloops for about 6 years and trained with Dr. B for quite a few of those, and then retired um, in 2012. So then, after I retired, I'm really trying to get my dates right. After I retired, that's when I got more into strength and conditioning work. I had been working all along, but more so to pay the bills and just to make ends meet. Um, so 2013, I moved to Victoria, where I am now, and started working at the Canadian Sport Institute, and ran a program there called the Canadian Sports School, which was um, a program for high school aged high performance athletes. So it was a really cool program. I was there for about 6 or 7 years and then moved over to Rugby Canada, where I started with their development program, and then just kind of been working my way through the programs and sort of up the pathway, I suppose. Um, when I first started at Rugby Canada, I worked with the primarily with the development academy, but I also had some of the development players and the younger players on the senior program. So I was involved in both programs and got to be involved in both streams of kind of the development, where you have a full year to train someone versus more of a senior competitive program where you might be getting someone ready to be selected for a tournament, but they might go, but they might not play that much, or they might not get selected to play at all. So, um, yeah, so over the years at rugby, I've just been um, learning and growing as a practitioner. And then I was promoted to the lead S&C coach for the senior women's sevens program 2 years ago. So heading into the Olympic year. So we were kind of found ourselves finishing in ninth place that year at the end of the season. And then we just did a very long, hard year of training, but the players were on board and the staff was on board, and we just pushed real hard and um, just made some huge strides over the year. And it was really exciting. We finished with a silver medal in Paris at the Olympic Games last summer. So that was a very rewarding way to sort of end that quad. And there'd been a lot of change and turmoil and different things within the program in that 6 years that I've been around. So it was a really nice time to just sort of see all the work come together. And so now we're at the start of a new quad, and yeah, looking to grow our depth and uh, our development pathway and all these things, and but still, continue to push the boundaries and push the performance at the top end. So it's been fun, and uh yeah, that's me in a nutshell, I suppose.
Nice, nice. I didn't know you worked with Dr. B before. I was a huge fan of his work. That was awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely it's something that was a really interesting experience. I'm happy to chat about it. And gave me a lot of interesting perspectives on how you can train. And I don't always use his methods like exclusively. Like I know some people work with him and they're like, this is the way, but it's something that kind of gave me some different tools that I draw from at times, and others you just, you have to kind of go in a different direction based on whatever constraints you're dealing with. But yeah,
Nice, nice. So, uh, before we dive into the topics I sent you, so what it's like to coach and train at the same time.
it was it was when I look back at it, it's absolutely insane. But at the time, you just do what you have to do, and you could normalize really anything. Um, One of the things that really helped, so the head coach that was at Cal at the time was Chris Huffins, the decathlete. And so when he came in as the new head coach there, that was my fifth year. So to keep my scholarship, I did like the volunteer assistant coach thing for the year. Um, and just learned so much from him on like the recruiting end, and helped the coach that I was working with, who was my throws coach in college. And then they got to a point where my throws coach had to move on, and then the job offer came to me. But I was like, okay, well, how am I going to do this? And he said, well, I'll help you, I'll coach you. And so I was like, okay, well, like he'd coached the throws before, and obviously like I was a throws coach, so it was more just like we would work together on it. But he really helped me to balance the demands of my job as an assistant coach, which he had a vested interest in, obviously, or with the demands of me as an athlete. And he really helped me to kind of push both ends and make sure both ends were successful. But I just didn't sleep very much was the problem. So um yeah, it just got I did that for 4 or 5 years and had some really great success. I coached a girl who was a walk-on non-scholarship, and she ended up being on a full scholarship and winning NCAA's in women's discus
Ooh,
in her senior year. So it was like as many I had a few All-Americans and some really great, accomplishments as a young coach. But that was probably the most rewarding one, to have a girl that came on as a walk-on, good student, just worked hard, and yeah, it was amazing. So
nice.
it was hard, but it's just one of those things. Like if you're just driven to be successful, you'll find a way.
So you like at the same time when you are coaching, you're also an elite athlete. Does that kind of help you coach or does that like because I know a lot of coaches they're actually not like elite athlete, but they love
Right.
the sport that and that's
Yeah.
somehow that is probably why they're so good at coaching. Do you think that being an elite athlete can help you or it's other way around?
Well, I think it's interesting. Like when I look back, I was like 22 or 23 when I first started. Like it's crazy. And when I look back, uh, I just wasn't. I didn't have a philosophy developed, and I didn't have an ability to build a strong culture. So I think there's a lot of the things as like the soft skills as a coach that I didn't have. I tried to manage as best as I could the awkwardness of like now coaching people that were my teammates a year ago or 6 months ago. You know what I mean? So I really had to like I learned a lot about kind of my own like personal boundaries as a coach, and just how I kind of had to cut off some like friendships, I suppose, and just really like if I was gonna go in this direction as a coach, I had to, stay kind of professional, I suppose. But I still like I think I was missing so many of like the soft skills of a coach. So I think I understood more of like the technique and the X's and O's of the throwing events. But yeah. So I don't know, but I think so being an elite athlete, and I think more than anything, being an athlete that since I was like, so my first coaching job, I was 14. I coached my sister's soccer team. Like I've always loved to coach. And I've always like been the type of athlete that would like naturally gravitate to hanging out with the coaches and like always wanting to just be a huge soccer or track or volleyball or whatever nerd that whatever sport I was in. So I think I've like by the time I was 22 or 23, I was still young, like socially, but my mind had been thinking about coaching for so long and I had been talking to coaches and trying to understand coaching. So I think that's the thing that really helped me kind of propel me. I almost think that being an elite athlete, I don't know if it helped. Maybe helped with recruiting, but I don't know. I Yeah, those were the early days weren't always the best days, you know.
So you you mentioned that soft skill. So
Yeah.
early on when you're coaching those track kids, you mentioned that you kind of lack of soft skill. So in terms of soft skill, like what exactly are you talking about? Because I feel like a lot of coaches nowadays kind of lean towards like I see a lot of coaches just use technology. They look at the iPad all the time, like don't know, yeah, don't
Mm,
know what they're doing or like don't know like the coaching cue or all those stuff. So in
right.
terms of like soft skill, like what exactly are we talking about?
Well, I think a few things. One was like my understanding now of building relationships with each one of my athletes. I did a master's in high performance coaching and leadership as well. So rather than like a master's of science, it really gets into, especially as an S&C coach, like a lot of people are like into like force plate data and like the hard data of the S&C world. For me, my master's focused a little bit more on the coaching science and like that kind of thing. So for me, I think what I've learned, and some of it you learn along the way, and the research that you learn validates how you coach. But I think that's what was missing for me in the early days was the understanding of building connections with athletes, um, building culture within a group, how to address um, uncomfortable topics and how to address things that didn't sit well with me, or knowing that an athlete is struggling. As an athlete, if I was struggling, I would just be knocking on my coach's office. Like, let's watch film, let's talk about this, what's going on. But not everyone's like that. So knowing that someone's struggling, and when I was younger, I was like, well, they'll come talk to me if there's a problem. But like I knew there was a problem, you know? So things like that. Whereas like now I'm much more proactive. If I sense somebody's off, I'm just going to have a conversation. But as a younger coach, I just hadn't developed that skill set yet and the awareness of like how to do that. And I think like that's the foundation of everything else you do as a coach. I think that unless you have that relationship and that foundation, then I don't like I think it really limits what you're able to do with that individual.
Hmm, nice. Feel like nowadays that is probably like the young coaches' lack of like these soft skills because they rely on like technology a lot. And
Yeah.
I like you mentioned like building the culture of like the team or like with other athletes. So, in how do you like mm, bring that experience to like now when you interact with the athlete? How do you build the culture with the team?
Well, it's a little bit different. Like working in a sport like rugby, for example, the coaches set the culture, and depending on the coach, I might have a bigger or a smaller role to play in that culture and how you might hold athletes accountable and what the standards might be and all that. When I was running that sports school program, for example, at the Sport Institute, that was my program. I was the head coach of that. And so that I could sort of uh I had free reign to build a culture there. And so for me, it was so that's a different process than what I have here within the rugby community, but or program. But I suppose, like for me, if I have free reign on something, I think it's being really clear on like what your goals and objectives and balancing that out with the type of environment you need to be successful to reach those goals. Um, and I think you need to co-create that culture with at least some of the players or athletes that are going to be in that environment. Maybe not everybody, maybe a leadership group or something. Um, and so I think it's really important to have like full buy-ins that when it does get hard, you can say, we did talk about this, that it was gonna be uncomfortable. And here we are. And so I think it's because it's not like a dictatorship, you know what I mean? I think you have to have people's willingness, especially when you talk about um, sports where or events where you have to push into like painful training zones and you really have to push your body and your mind into some dark places. I find you really have to have those players on board for a common goal and their consent to say, yeah, I want to go there and help me get there. Um, and that's a whole journey within itself is teaching individuals how to get into that place too. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's not like just because somebody said, yeah, I want to improve my fitness, I want to, you know, push myself. It doesn't mean that they know how to. So you have to like walk with people a little bit and help them to understand that you're there with them and like they're gonna slip and fall and they're gonna take the easy way out of a workout or they're gonna take the easy way out of a test or and then allow them to reflect and say I could have pushed myself more. So it's like it's just like you really I never yell, I never have to come down on people. I just have that um those relationships where I can sort of say like was that a 10 out of 10? Was that 100%? Like could you have done more? And they'll often just say like not exactly. Like they'll be honest usually, if especially if they know they're safe to be honest and say, yeah, I can actually do better.
Hmm. I like where this is going. I'm sorry I didn't ask any other question I sent to you, but
No, it's fine.
I'm gonna keep going on this. So,
No, it's fine. And I'm just gonna plug my computer in really quickly because
okay, no worries.
my, my battery has a tendency to just last a solid half an hour. Okay,
Okay.
good.
So, you mentioned that a lot of times training is like really hard for athlete. You really have to go through those like dark places.
Mhm.
And you also mentioned you never have to yell. So, how do you like, is it create buy-in or like, is it like building the relationship with the athlete? How do you take athletes to those places or really go through like those really hard training period and without yelling at them or like screaming at them because a lot of coaches like they just yell, scream at them, just yeah, whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah. I guess so in rugby, like, well, especially rugby sevens, but across rugby, both sevens and 15s, there's a running test called the Bronco, and that's like one of the more common um, fitness tests that rugby teams will use. So that's one thing. It's about a 5-minute run test, just like a lot of like our sort of cardiovascular tests. It's alongside of that, repeat speed ability is huge in rugby sevens, and so like, you might have some of our wingers or some of our speedsters putting up in a 14-minute game, maybe like, sorry, can you see that pop up on my screen or no? Okay. No, I think it was just on my end. Um, yeah, maybe like 700 to 1,000 meters of high speed running in a 14-minute game. And then 6 games over 2 or 3 days. So it's a lot of high speed meters, a lot of high speed running, and situations where like you're seven players on a field in sevens. So it's a lot of 1v1. It's a lot of open space. And so you could have to cover like and chase back, tackle somebody, poach the ball, get up, and now take off again with the ball. So you might have like 100 meters of running in just a few seconds, and then maybe at the most 30 seconds break, and then potentially do it all over again, like, and so just the culture of our team when I first started was I think because we weren't training at a hard enough level, so then people were put in situations in a game that they weren't physically prepared for or mentally prepared for. So you start getting into that dark place, and now you're on a field looking at defending somebody, and you're like, either I'm gonna make my tackle or miss my tackle, but like everyone's kind of like marking someone, and you're really responsible, and you have the ability to really be exposed, I suppose. So I think like for our players, they would often call for a sub and ask to come off the field rather than, no, okay, I'm in that dark place, but I know I've got another 2 minutes, or I know if there was a whistle with 30 seconds, I know I can recompose myself and go again. But rather, they were like, I'm dying, like asked to come off. And so our head coach was like, man, like we need people to be able to play a full game or close to it. And more than anything, I want people to be able to know their actual capacity. So to answer your question, it's like putting people into those places in a safer environment in training, and just saying like, look, like here are the GPS stats from this game. We know that these people are probably going to cover this amount of distance in this amount of time. And they're already bought in because they already know that they feel a certain way in the games, and it scares them because they're also in a stadium. They don't want to let their teammates down, and they don't want to get embarrassed, and they don't want to miss their tackles, and or they just don't want to get beat. So and there's also the component of decision making under fatigue. Sometimes they just get to a place and their brain just kind of shuts off. So it's really like presenting them with whether we're training to perform better in their bronco, and addressing more of like an aerobic kind of cardiovascular component, or more of that repeat speed. Both are very uncomfortable. Um, but it's like kind of getting to a point where we all have common goals, and it's like, this is how we're going to do it together. Um, and then doing that in such a way where you're kind of meeting them where they are, and not giving them something that's going to absolutely obliterate them, giving them something that's hard but doable, and then allowing them to see progress week after week, I think is the biggest thing for me. Giving them an opportunity to say, yeah, like, can you push a little bit harder? Great, because next week we're going to dial it up too. So like, and just getting them to buy into that is huge. And I think it was kind of like a perfect storm of we had we had won, our program had won. I wasn't working with Rugby Canada at the time, but we won a bronze medal in Rio in the 2016 Olympics. So there's sort of this expectation of like, we're a good rugby team. We're good at sevens, we win medals. And so like ninth place just didn't really fit with how we view ourselves as a program. So it was easy to get that buy-in. Players were kind of like, okay, yeah, we want to win a medal in Paris. Like, let's go. So I was like, okay, well, let's do that. So yeah, it's just kind of a careful build, I suppose.
Nice, nice. This actually worked perfect because you mentioned like the GPS data. So um and I also want to ask you about like load management in terms of like GPS
Mhm.
or like force plate data.
Yeah.
So uh I'm gonna start by asking you this. Like, how often do you guys jump on the force plate?
Not very often, to be honest. I use force plates a lot more with return to play and like injury returns. Um, but I don't use it. I'll use it as like maybe kind of like a benchmarking tool to look at maybe some RSIs or look at asymmetries. But we don't use it kind of like daily or um, to manage wellness or to manage like day-to-day readiness. Yeah.
Why why is that? Because like uh if you don't use force plate, like what do you kind of like monitor or like what do you use to like in terms of knowing their readiness?
Yeah. We do a daily like, subjective like morning wellness. And that gives us, I mean, it's for sure subjective, um, but it gives us a good idea where people are at. Um, we'll do a lot of, I think for me, part of it is just the time. Like we have one set of force plates here, and just like the time it takes to kind of run people through. And um, but we'll do a lot of things with tendos and do stuff with bar speed. So for me, I would give them like in their weights, for example, like 3 times a week, some like empty bar jumps or something that's a bit more standardized and look a bit at like peak velocities on the bar. And that kind of gives me usually an idea of like, at least if we're tracking in a certain direction and if things start to like plateau, I guess that's maybe where like the Dr. B stuff comes in is like I'm usually looking for plateaus or like drop offs. Um, but yeah, it's just not something I've done. I've not done a lot of like monitoring and using it for jumps and that kind of thing.
Nice, nice. How about GPS metrics? Like in terms of like GPS, what kind of metrics you guys track and how
Mhm.
do you use that to like I hate to use the word, but yeah, load monitoring.
It's okay, you can use it. Because I think especially for me last season, that was like such a huge part of it because it was like, okay, well, we have to train harder than we've ever trained. So how do we do that in a way that's like not just like throwing everything at you, but doing it in a way that's thoughtful and careful. Um, but like we're going into uncharted waters, you know? And so so our GPS is with Stat Sports. And so with that, we kind of have a lot of the similar metrics to Catapult. Um, the biggest ones we look at would be like a total distance, obviously. We'll look a lot at zone 2 to zone 6 because that will kind of takes the walking and the um, kind of like the inactive portions of the practice out of the equation. Um, we'll look at high metabolic load, which um, I don't know. I'll just explain it because I don't know if people will be familiar, but high metabolic load kind of refers to there's like a threshold of speed, which you can actually adjust in the background, but it's typically like kind of getting into high speed running meters. It also takes into consideration like um, the accelerometer and the gyroscope in the unit itself. So like changes of direction, stop, start, or even swerves and um, different metrics or like a tackle or collision or down on the ground back up like all of that would be considered like extra load on the body and would be picked up by the by that metric. So that's a great one that we use to kind of look at just like the intensity of a session almost. Um, and then with a lot of like our sprint and our repeat speed and that kind of thing, we're looking at just the different thresholds of high speed running and sprint meters and that kind of thing. Um, those are probably the biggest metrics that we look at. I don't look as much at accelerations and decelerations, um, because I think that, yeah, to me, that changes a lot day to day with depending on the grid size of like if we're doing like a small sided game and with a lot more like stop starts where you open that grid up a little bit more and like that can be influenced a bit more by like different parameters. So for me, I don't look so much at those. Um, and I don't necessarily need to look at the total distance. I prefer to look at zone 2 to 6, but the iPad that we have to monitor our live GPS outside is doesn't show the zone 2 to 6. So it's like a little bit like constrained by the technology and the software. And it might be that our iPad is 10 years old and we just need a new one. So, but those are the biggest metrics that we'll use just to monitor, especially with the team. And obviously, we'll look at max velocity to track individual speeds, especially in those speed sessions where we're pushing top speed on a day. So like if it's a session that where it's like, okay, uh, today we're gonna give everyone an opportunity to open up to like 50 or 60 meters 3 times and like let's really push and we'll give people an opportunity for that to be kind of like what their 100% is in that week. But then you also get a situation where like in a scrimmage, somebody opens up and is getting chased and they run faster than they ran in their sprint. So um, it's so we have the GPS that we monitor for our speed sessions, and then we also are looking at like what speeds people are hitting in games and in game situations.
Nice, nice. Um, so when it comes to like load monitoring or like periodizing training,
Mhm.
does like the Bondarchuk approach kind of affect how you periodize training or like kind of follow like whatever linear, whatever periodization model? I know it's not gonna be perfect
Yeah,
and it's not you're not gonna follow the book, whatever.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I guess my question is like, does working with Dr. Bonachuk change how you program stuff?
For sure it does. I think when I'm talking about like overall load of the team and planning out, say we have a 6 week block leading into uh, a tournament, I think I look at it a little bit more like Dr. B would be more of like dosing the same thing every day over time and waiting for a change or waiting to sort of see some sort of adaptation within an individual. And for me, that's just way too complex for what we're able to do and with the staff size that we have. So I think, and when I'm thinking about team loads, particularly like last fall when we had, or not last fall, but 2 falls ago of the Olympic season, we had like a 6 week block leading into Pan Am Games. And then after Pan Am Games, our season started. So once our season starts, you basically have a tournament, you have a week off, you have 3 weeks to build, and then you fly around the world somewhere, and then you have another tournament. And so you kind of get into this like just maintenance and survival recovery mode. So but that week or that 6 week block that we had in the fall, for me, that was where I was like, we've got 6 weeks to really get us fit and strong and give ourselves a base that's going to last us through the season. Um, and so in doing that, it was more of like looking at the like acute chronic ratios and just like how much can we turn this up little by little, looking at that morning wellness, looking at like their subjective um, measures that they're reporting back to us, looking at just how they're presenting. Our medical team was huge for this, and sometimes myself and the coaches might have had one thing planned, and medical would just come in and be like, "That we have 13 bodies laying around in the medical clinic right now, just like we're not sure if they're alive. And so sometimes we would have to adjust based on what we're seeing in front of us. Um, but I think it was more of just kind of like a more traditional periodization where it's like you got a low week, you're trying to build. Can we hold that for 2 weeks? Let's deload them and then like let's push again. And um, it was more of that, but trying to do that safely within the constraints that we had and just sort of the research that we know around acute chronics or just loading and that kind of thing.
So, I think the question that I had is like, no, the question I have right now is uh, like you mentioned, sometimes it's gonna be like very, very hard. Like there's like people lying in the, in
Yeah.
the training room, like like they're just tired. So, how do you manage those situation, or like how do you prepare your athletes for those situations?
Well, it's a great question. And I think it's like kind of a layered process. Like the first is that if I'm like, say I just described, we're gonna have like low, medium, high, high, deload, go to a tournament. For example, like we would show that plan to the players and be like, here's the plan. Here's where you're gonna feel like you're dying, and that's okay. Within reason, obviously, like if you're injured or this or that, like talk to us, but like you're gonna feel awful in this week, and that's okay. We're gonna pull it back. You're gonna have a recovery, and then we're gonna go again. And when we go again, we're gonna start to do 2 sessions in a day because we need to be ready to play 2 or 3 times in a day. And we need to do this if we're gonna be ready to play in a tournament. And just like they have to know what's coming and to buy in. So that's a big part of it. That's like the first layer for me is communicating the plan. And I would just do it in like, I would just show them like kind of a calendar snapshot of the month or the block or whatever, and just color code. Like I just kept it super simple. I color coded it like green for training days, because of green for grass. And it was like light green is easy, medium green is medium, and dark green is a hard day. And so they would just kind of know, like, it just kind of became the language, like, hey, it's dark green tomorrow. So, you know, get your sleep tonight, make sure you're hydrating. Like, and so that's a big important part for me. And then it's also like managing individuals. So you might have some younger players that are just like they don't have the the training age to be able to handle that. And so sometimes it's like managing individuals, and that's where the live GPS out on the field is actually really helpful because we might just say like, look, this person is going to split reps with this person. They're going to play um, every other phase or every other drill, and we're going to manage their load in this way. Or sometimes it's our older players that are like, some of the older players just don't have it in them anymore to like have those big huge meters, and so managing the people on the other ends or like both ends of the spectrum. um the question about like kind of Dr. B and how that plays in, I think sometimes like I can recognize now, like if someone's just fallen off, as like their nervous system has fallen off. And for me, I'm like, okay, like I can see what's happening here. And you almost like can normalize it because like having experienced that, and like that's a whole other tangent, but having experienced what that like down period feels like is like when like nothing's going right and you can barely like type and print and all these things. Like I get it. And so just sometimes like those individuals also need a bit of a different approach. But by and large, if there's 20 people out at training, probably 15 of them are on kind of like the main program for the team. Um, and then when it does get hard, it's like then having those conversations, having those plans, like then I would kind of give like a Monday chat, like this is what we're doing this week. Here's where it's going to be really hard. Like here's where you want to wrap your brain around it. And I think having like a track coach's background, even though obviously I have nothing to do with the distance events, but breaking our Bronco testing down into like pacing strategies where it's like, it's not just like a thing where you go out and then like fly and die type of thing we would say, right? Like you want to like you don't find a 1500-meter runner that just goes out and wings it. Like there's a very specific strategy that somebody works on and dials in for themselves based on their own particular profile. Like can they kick and close in like more quickly than others, or are they someone that can go out quickly and hold that? Like so it was also like working with those players to find those particular strategies that worked for them and like getting them to try different things. And sometimes they would just go out too fast and they couldn't hold things. And it was like, okay, well, that didn't work. Got to go out slower, and trust like helping them kind of like find those solutions for themselves and then trust themselves in the process of if we are running those Bronco workouts or Bronco tests, like knowing that like, okay, well, other people might go ahead of me on that, on the, in the first rep, and that's okay. Like I've got a plan for my pacing. I'm going to stick to it. So it's just, yeah, a lot of it's like having a plan, communicating that plan, managing the outliers, having conversations with everyone along the way, making sure everyone's comfortable and confident with that, and just checking into like that reflection piece for them. Like, how hard was that? Can you make it harder? Was there more in the tank? Um, yeah. Did I miss anything in that one?
No, 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 you're good. You're good.
It was a big question, but yeah, I think
Yeah, you're
that's
good.
okay.
So, uh, I feel like a lot of the I don't know, because I did work with rugby when I was in Taiwan,
Oh, nice.
but it's they're not pro athletes and they're not like elite. But I feel like a lot of times when we do those conditioning tests, those that really like perform really well on the conditioning test, they probably are not our best player. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that the case? Like you guys are facing, or is different?
No, I would say it's like there for us in our team and in our program, there's just people that are like born to run and people that like naturally are better runners. Some of our forwards are like bigger people. And so it's like for me, it's not it's like creating realistic goals for people that are based on their positions and based on their body types and not just like wanting or expecting everyone to be able to be here when that's unrealistic. So some of our some of our girls that are like 6 feet tall and 180 pounds, they're gonna have a very different outcome from someone that's like, 150 pounds and 5'5". And so it's just kind of like the natural like biology of it. So but every once in a while there's outliers that creep in as well, right? And so which are also great because then you don't get pigeonholed into this like I'm a big person, I can't run fast. Um, because sometimes you'll see, bigger, taller people that are wired for that, like, they have that aerobic base. Um, so I think it's more of just like helping each individual just like it sounds maybe cliche, but just be the best, do the best for themselves they can each time and just build on that every time. And so what I'll get them to do is like every time we run a Bronco test, for example, I'll get them to, because we film it, I'll get them to watch it back and just time their splits and then review that and just like compare their splits to their pacing, like their targets. And then we all have a conversation about it. Like, did you hit your targets? Why do I not? Um, what do you think we should do next time? Like, did you go out too fast because you still got too excited, even though you knew you were going to go out a little slower? Did you go out, um, did you go out too slow and there was actually more gas in the tank at the end? It's like sometimes that's the best way because it's like, okay, well, there's more there. Like, okay, what rep could you have started to pick up the pace a little bit? So, um, so yeah, I think it's breaking that down for those individuals and yeah, helping them find that pathway for themselves.
Nice, nice.
But yeah, we it's interesting. Like some of our better players are definitely quite fit. I'd say there's a correlation to performance and Bronco scores. And I think there's like it's also it's a learned like running a Bronco is an acquired skill. You know what I mean? So learning how to pace yourself, learning how to do it, learning how to calm your nerves, and they're not distance runners, they're rugby players. And so like they're it's a foreign thing for them to line up against people and just run. Uh, so I think uh, so I think the longer they're in the program, the better they get at it. And we do see like often some of our better players are quite good at it.
Cool, cool. That's cool. That's cool. So, a lot of ACL return to play, and there's like research about like when should we start loading after like the surgery. Some says like probably rest for like a week or so. Some say you should load them like right away. Like
Mm.
I'm curious about your approach. Like, do like how fast do you load them?
So when you say load, like
Like
what are you
maybe
thinking of?
like uh how fast do you like want them to progress like just walking, and then like how fast do you want them to like progress to like maybe some sprint drills or like whatever?
Mm. Um, for us, there's there's well, there's quite a few different like guides to those ACL returns. For us, we have like a few different things. There's one resource called Fowler Kennedy, and that's the name of a clinic up at a university in Canada. Um, so Fowler Kennedy, they have a really robust like overview on the ACL return, and it breaks it down into like 0 to like first 2 weeks. Like here's the goals, here's what you want to do, and then like 2 to 4 weeks, or kind of like breaks it up into little kind of chunks. And then we've we've also at some point, I don't even know who created it, but when I arrived at Rugby Canada, there was a bit of a like a spreadsheet of like kind of with these phases built into them. And then like the role of like a medical practitioner during this time, the role of an S&C coach, the role of like the rugby coach and what rugby where rugby coaches could be involved. And then in the last couple of years, we've also added a nutrition component to like what types of supplements or dietary nutritional concerns or I don't know, things might be able to like help or support at different stages. Um, so for us, it's like the first 2 weeks is like almost 100% medical. Um, and I won't really see an athlete in those first 2 weeks. It's just all about like those initial stages of healing and rest and recovery. Um, it's maybe after the first 2 weeks, if they're feeling okay, mobile enough, I'll start getting them into the weight room to do a little bit of like upper body type of work. Um, it also depends on if there's a meniscus or any other repairs with the ACL. So often we'll see that. So like I'm working with an ACL return right now, which was also a large meniscus repair. So like as you know, one of the biggest things immediately following an ACL is to get the range of motion back in the knee. And then this particular player was in a straight leg brace for 8 weeks to let the meniscus heal. And so it's like there's just different things and non-weight bearing, I think for 6 of those weeks, 4 to 6 non-weight bearing. So sometimes for me, it's like, where's that person in their season? And like we had a player get injured over the weekend, and it was like the end of their season, like they're not going to be back now for the season. And just the amount of like they're still on crutches, the amount of like technical difficulty would be for them to like be in a weight room and like navigate. And I was like, just do your rehab right now. Like, just take this. This is the end of your season. It's going to be a long return back um, with your injury. So like, let's not push it right now. So like, we also have to look at the individual and like looking down the line of like, are we trying to get them back in 10 months for an Olympics? Or do they have time to just like wallow and be sad a little bit and just and have a bit of an off season? Um, but so it's really for us, like I have the benefit of a really strong medical team that's like in-house. We're working together day to day, and they really take on that first section of like when do they walk, when do they stand, when do they do that type of thing. Um, but yeah, usually between if it's like a really straightforward type of thing, like once they can start biking and like get fully like get that full range of motion to go around on a bike, um, then we start to just like 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Once they can get to 20 minutes, that's kind of like medical will hand them over to me to start bike conditioning and start like obviously nothing hard, but like then we can do like repeat 1 minute or 2 minutes or different things like that. Um, once they can uh and like the check mark is usually like once they can do that thing with medical confidently, so they'll probably start like just standing up like a box squat, that type of thing. Once they can do that confidently, then they'll bring that to me and like, okay, you've graduated from your box squat, now you go to S&C. And that's when I would take that box squat, put them on force plates, and I'm starting to look at like what asymmetry is there and how they're able to load even with their own body weight. Where our force plates are with Vald. And so in the software, it's not really on purpose, but there's this little graph you can see that kind of gives you that like left to right balance. And so sometimes I'll actually show them and give them like that external feedback of like almost like video, like gamify it a little bit to like, can you keep your force on that midline? And sometimes they're just not even aware of how much they're compensating. Um, so that's kind of where we start is like repatterning. And once that pattern's looking all right, then that's when we'll start to maybe just like goblet squat to a box. And um, the nice thing is that you can usually, unless it's a hamstring graft, you can usually start to RDL or just different things at that time too that kind of stress the hamstrings a little bit more and just a bit more hip hinge that don't involve the knee so much. So just try and work around it as much as possible. But yeah. And then the biggest thing for me is like we try and get them in the pool right away or like as early as possible. Um, and once they're kind of proficient and they can walk on land and like, because the last thing you want to do is have someone go to the pool, slip on a pool deck. And you know what I mean? Like, are they
Yeah.
physically capable of actually getting themselves to a pool and into the water? It's sometimes like it's a big thing. Um, so the pool for us is huge. We do have access to an Alter G in town here at the Sport Institute. So we'll use that later down the line. But for us, like a pool is so great because there's so much like just proprioceptive qualities that you can also retrain in a pool, and you can do so much more like lateral kind of like change of direction type stuff too. Um, and obviously like that comes further down the line with an ACL, but um, yeah, we'll be like putting them in a pool as soon as possible, even if it's for like walking, walling stuff. Um, even like step ups in the pool that are kind of like maybe like waters to like hip height. So it's a little bit like um, kind of the load is off, or calf raises in the water, like water supported calf raises. So yeah, we do quite a bit in the pool. The longer I've been doing this, and we do see a decent number of ACLs. So I think like that's one of the bigger tools that I use more and more and more as the years go by. Um, but yeah, I think it's uh that 4 month, what am I doing? 4 month time point where we get them back kind of running. For us, they go back and they'll have surgeon clearance. But it's a little bit of a gray area because for me, like running is running. So I think there's a lot you can do with sprint drills and training. So for me, it's like a seamless thing, like they're doing ankling and they're doing marching or skipping A's and B's in a pool. And then at a point you try that on dry land, and you start some like really baby ankling, and you kind of want to see that that stuff is okay before you send them back to the surgeon, because if it's not, like it's actually important for the surgeon to know that. So they're doing, I'd say like for the 2 weeks before that surgical clearance for running, they're out on a field doing some running drills, and nothing crazy. They're not like opening up, they're not at high speed, everything's slow and controlled, but they are doing stuff so that once they have clearance, that's when we start like a walk jog and our running progressions. So, and once you get to that point, then it's easy.
Nice, nice. I like it. I like it. I like it. I guess that's all the question I have for today. So, for those who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
I'm on Instagram. Coach Jen Joyce is my handle there. And then Coach Jen Joyce at gmail.com would be an email. But either place is a good one to get me.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.